In our last discussion, we talked about the visible symptoms of a philosophy that had lost its way. The reckless leaps to grand ideas, the stubborn clinging to abstract notions, the endless debates over words instead of grappling with the world itself, the creation of beautiful but imaginary systems. It was a picture of intellectual barrenness. But why? What was the root cause? What was happening inside the human mind itself that allowed these errors to flourish, preventing it from truly grasping reality? The insight came that the problem wasn't just out there, in the methods used or the theories built. The problem was in here, within the very structure and habits of the human understanding. It was argued that the mind is not a pristine, clear window onto the world. Instead, it is beset by fundamental distortions, by false notions, by ingrained biases that twist and corrupt its perception of reality. These distortions were powerful. They were called idols. Think of them not as statues to be worshipped, but as deceptive illusions, deeply embedded habits of thought that hinder the mind's approach to truth, like fortifications protecting ignorance. To truly seek knowledge, to restore the sciences, the mind itself first needed to be cleansed, purged of these insidious influences. It was a necessary, difficult preparation, like clearing the ground before building something solid. There are four main kinds of these idols, four ways our own minds, or the tools we use, or the systems we adopt, can lead us astray. First, and perhaps most fundamentally, are the idols of the tribe. These are not individual quirks. These are inherent to human nature itself, to the entire tribe or race of mankind. They are wired into us. The human senses, the human mind, they were seen as being like an uneven mirror. They don't just reflect the universe as it is, they distort it. They mingle our nature with the universe, rather than showing us nature in its own pure form. What are some ways this innate distortion manifests? Our mind is wired to suppose a greater order and uniformity in things than it finds. We crave patterns, symmetry. We see connections where there are none, or impose rigid structure on complexity. And once an opinion takes root, once we've made one of those premature leaps we discussed, the mind becomes a fortress, actively drawing everything else to support it. Anything that contradicts it, it's ignored, condemned, excluded. Confirmation bias built into our very being. Then there's our natural inclination to be more moved and excited by affirmatives than by negatives. We notice when something confirms our idea, but we often overlook or discount when it fails. While ideally both should matter equally, it was argued that in any true test of an idea, a single negative instance, a single failure, actually holds greater weight. But our minds don't naturally work that way. We note the hits and disregard the misses, inflating the perceived support for our theories. The mind is also disproportionately influenced by a few striking or familiar things that inflate the imagination. We see a few examples and then believe everything else behaves in the same way as those few things. This prevents us from seeking out remote and heterogeneous instances, those strange, different cases that could actually test or break our theories. And crucially, the mind naturally tends to ignore what isn't immediately visible. It fails to seek the underlying causes of things, the subtle actions of hidden forces, the changes happening at the smallest scales. It was understood that without investigating these things invisible, these hidden workings, we could achieve nothing truly new or useful in nature.
These are the unavoidable distortions of being human, biases arising from the very way our minds are built. Next, we descend into the individual distortions, the idols of the cave. If the idols of the tribe are the universal human condition, the cave is the specific, unique shadow cast by your particular circumstances. These prejudices arise from an individual man's specific nature, his upbringing, his education, his habits, the chances of his life. Each person lives in their own intellectual cave, and their view of the world is filtered by its unique contours. Think of a brilliant mind becoming so proud of its own creations, perhaps a system of logic, that it forces all of natural reality to fit into that system, making it rigid and argumentative rather than letting nature speak for itself. Or consider minds at opposite extremes, one focused only on minute differences, missing the big picture. Another only seeing abstract resemblances, missing crucial details. Both are trapped by the confines of their own intellectual cave. The advice here was sharp and personal. Anyone studying nature should be suspicious of whatever allures and captivates his understanding. Be wary of your own preferences, your own darlings, for they may be blinding you. Then, the most troublesome of all, the idols of the marketplace. These creep into the understanding, not from human nature itself, nor from the individual, but through the alliance of words and names. They arise from language, from communication. The observation was made that language, developed for common discourse by ordinary people, divides things along lines most suited to common understanding, not along the lines dictated by nature itself, but by convenience. And when someone tries to refine these divisions, to make language align more accurately with how the world actually is, words shout him down. The ingrained, flawed terminology resists change. This leads to innumerable empty controversies and fictions. We argue endlessly over words that are poorly defined, or words that name things that don't even exist in reality. We use terms that are muddled and vague, and hastily and unjustly derived from things lumping fundamentally different properties under one imprecise label. Language, our primary tool for thought, becomes a barrier, rendering philosophical discussion sophistical and inactive, detached from the reality it is supposed to describe. This is the root of the endless disputation we touched upon previously. Finally, the idols of the theater. These are not innate or spontaneous. They are imposed upon us. They come from the fictitious tales in theories and from wrong-headed laws of demonstrations that we receive from schools of thought, from traditions. These accepted philosophical systems were seen as being like elegant stage plays, which represent reality as their authors would wish it to be, not as it is. They are coherent internal dramas, but they don't reflect the true world. There were seen to be three main types of these intellectual stage plays. Some were sophistical or rational. These start with pure reason or logic, building elaborate systems, and then, like a playwright directing actors, they force experience, observation, and evidence to fit the preconceived plot. Reality is twisted and led about like a captive to conform to the predetermined ideas.
This is the ultimate expression of building abstract systems first and ignoring inconvenient facts, the very dogmatism we identified. Others were empirical. These arise from focusing on too few experiments, perhaps even carefully performed ones, but then building an entire philosophy upon that narrow foundation. Everything else is twisted in extraordinary ways to fit the limited data. This is the overgeneralization, the premature leap from insufficient particulars taken to an extreme. And some were superstitious. These improperly blend faith and natural inquiry, either by trying to derive scientific truths from religious texts, using scripture as a science book, or by assuming purpose and intent, final causes in the physical world itself. While faith has its domain, introducing these notions into science was seen as creating a sterile science, explaining why something might be, in a teleological sense, instead of how it physically works. Giving to faith what is faith's domain leaves natural philosophy free to investigate material causes. These four kinds of idols, rooted in our nature as a species, in our individual quirks, in the language we use, and in the systems we inherit, are powerful forces. They are the forts and defense works that prevent the mind from receiving the true rays of things. Overcoming them is not easy. It requires a conscious, rigorous effort to recognize these biases in ourselves, in our language, and in the theories we encounter. But this purging of the understanding is the essential first step. Only by freeing the mind from these false notions can it prepare itself to receive the true light of nature, to build knowledge on a solid foundation of reality, and ultimately to gain true power and dominion over the universe. The work begins within.